Welcome to Bedtime Astronomy. Explore the wonders of the cosmos with our soothing Bedtime Astronomy podcast. Each episode offers a gentle journey through the stars, planets, and beyond, perfect for unwinding after a long day. Let's travel through the mysteries of the universe as you drift off into a peaceful slumber under the night sky.
So imagine for a second that you're trying to troubleshoot and maintain this vintage 1970s machine, like, say, a classic car. But there's a catch.
Right, a pretty big catch in this case.
Yeah, a massive one. The car is currently flying through absolute darkness, something like 15 billion miles away from the mechanic. And on top of that, its battery is just, slowly and permanently dying.
It's a terrifying scenario if you're the mechanic.
Exactly. But that is the literal reality for the team at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Because on April 17, 2026, those engineers sent commands to shut down a major instrument, the Low-Energy Charged Particles Experiment, or the LECP on the Voyager 1 spacecraft.
Which, naturally sounds like bad news, right? When you hear they're turning things off.
Right, you think it's breaking. But our mission for this deep dive today is to really unpack why that isn't the case. We're getting into the sources today to show that this isn't just a story about a machine breaking down. It's actually this incredible story of survival. We're looking at these razor-thin margins, the staggering physics of managing power in deep space, and, what this little probe that could is still whispering back to Earth from the interstellar void.
Yeah, and I think it's important to set the tone right away. Voyager 1 launched on September 5, 1977. So we're talking about a near 49-year legacy here.
Which is just wild.
It really is. And the key takeaway from the mission logs and the engineering briefs we've been reviewing is that shutting off the LECP is absolutely not a failure. It is a highly strategic, incredibly calculated maneuver to keep humanity's farthest outpost alive.
Yeah, it's like they're not just passively watching the lights go out.
No, not at all.
They're making this proactive choice. But before we even get into, what the LECP is and why they turned it off, I feel like we need to talk about the how. Because just turning off a switch that far away is a logistical nightmare.
Oh, completely. The sheer friction of trying to communicate with Voyager 1 right now is, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
Right, because it's over 15 billion miles away, which is about 25 billion kilometers.
And at that distance, even light, which is the absolute speed limit of the universe, it takes a long time to travel.
Yeah, it's not instantaneous. Like if I send a text message to a friend across the globe, it's basically instant. But sending a text to Voyager...
It takes roughly 23 hours just for the signal to reach the spacecraft.
23 hours.
Yeah, and then you have to wait another 23 hours just for the confirmation ping to come back to Earth and say, hey, I got the message.
So wait, you send a command that is going to permanently alter this historic spacecraft, and then you just have to sit on your hands for almost 2 days waiting to see if it worked. How does a team even manage a procedure with that kind of lag? The psychological tension must be unbearable.
It requires a level of operational discipline that is it's unique to the Voyager interstellar mission. You can't just press a button. It involves the deep space network, right? These giant 70-meter antennas on Earth.
Because the signal is so weak by the time it gets there.
Exactly. They're pumping tens of kilowatts of power out of these massive dishes. But by the time that radio wave expands over 15 billion miles, Voyager's catching a signal that's, a fraction of a billionth of a watt.
Wow.
And it gets crazier because the computers on Voyager are from the 70s. They have incredibly limited memory.
Like less memory than a modern key fob.
Basically, yeah. So they aren't just sending an off command. They're doing this heavily choreographed digital surgery. They have to creatively reprogram these aging computers using sequential octal code, slotting it into specific memory addresses.
Without messing up the core code that keeps the antenna pointed at Earth.
Right, because if the antenna drifts, you lose the spacecraft forever.
Oh.
There's zero room for error. And that specific LECP shutdown sequence we're talking about, once the command arrived, it took the spacecraft about 3 hours and 15 minutes just to execute it.
Okay, so that really paints a picture of how hard it is to just talk to this thing. But that leads us to the grim reality that actually forced them to send that command in the first place. The spacecraft is starving.
Starving for power, yes. This is the core engineering crisis of the whole mission.
Right. And to understand that, we have to look at how it gets its power, because it doesn't use solar panels, right? The sun is way too far away.
Yeah, out there, the sun is just a slightly brighter star in the sky. So instead, both Voyagers are powered by these things called RTGs, radioisotope thermoelectric generators.
Okay, RTGs. How do those actually work?
Well, they rely on the radioactive decay of plutonium-238. Inside these generators, as the plutonium naturally decays, it gives off a lot of heat. And the RTGs basically convert that heat directly into electricity using the temperature difference between the hot plutonium and the cold vacuum of space.
It's just solid-state physics, no moving parts.
Right, no moving parts to break down, which is why it's lasted almost 50 years. But here's the catch: physics is relentless. The plutonium is literally decaying away.
Right, it's a finite resource.
Exactly. At launch in 1977, those RTGs provided about 470 watts combined. But because of the natural half-life of the plutonium, they lose about 4 watts of power every single year.
4 watts a year. I kind of visualize that like, being stuck in this massive, freezing dark room and the only light bulb keeping you warm is just slowly, irreversibly dimming.
That is a very accurate way to look at it, because by 2026, those power levels have gotten critically low.
So, if the margins are so razor thin, how do the engineers even decide what stays on? Like, how do you choose between keeping the spacecraft's brain warm and keeping its eyes open?
It is a brutal process of triage. Every single watt is aggressively accounted for. They have to balance the science operations, the instruments gathering data, with the essential systems, like the computer and the transmitter needed to beam that data back to Earth.
Yeah, because if it can't transmit, what's the point?
Right. But the real balancing act, the thing that dictates everything, is thermal management. Deep space is effectively absolute zero. And Voyager uses this propellant called hydrazine for its tiny thrusters to keep the antenna pointed at Earth.
And hydrazine can freeze.
It freezes at roughly 2 degrees Celsius. If the fuel lines get too cold, the hydrazine freezes solid, the lines could rupture, and the spacecraft loses the ability to point at Earth. Mission over.
Oh, wow. So they literally have to use electricity just to run heaters on the fuel lines.
Exactly. And over the decades, they've deactivated every non-essential heater. But eventually, you run out of easy things to turn off.
Which brings us to the tipping point. Because that 4-watt annual drain, it's a slow bleed. You can plan for that. But looking at the sources, there was actually a very sudden, a specific catalyst that forced NASA's hand in April of 2026.
Yeah, it wasn't just the gradual decay. On February 27th, 2026, the spacecraft was performing this routine roll maneuver, basically rotating to calibrate its instruments.
Okay, a routine roll. What happened?
Well, during that maneuver, there was an unexpected power dip. The voltage on the main electrical bus dropped, and that is incredibly dangerous because Voyager has this onboard defense mechanism, an autonomous fault protection system.
It's kind of like a computer safe mode, right?
Sort of, but way more aggressive.
Yeah.
If the fault protection system senses that the spacecraft is drawing more power than it has, it will just blindly start shutting things down to save the core systems.
And you desperately want to avoid triggering that, right? Because trying to reboot a 49-year-old operating system from scratch while it's in safe mode sounds terrifying.
It is the absolute worst-case scenario. Because if it shuts down the wrong heater autonomously and the fuel lines freeze before Earth even knows what happened.
Because of the 23-hour delay.
Exactly. By the time JPL gets the telemetry, the mission could already be dead. So the engineers had to intervene. The LECP shutdown was actually part of a pre-planned sequence that they agreed on years ago. They knew this day was coming.
So is proactive amputation like setting off an instrument early? Is that always safer than just letting the spacecraft's own defense mechanisms kick in?
Without a doubt. It's all about buying precious time and maintaining control. By acting first and shutting down the LECP in a controlled, orderly manner, they lowered the overall power draw, stabilized the voltage, and kept the fault protection system from waking up.
Okay, so that's 7 of the 10 original instruments now turned off on Voyager 1, right?
Yep. Voyager 2 actually had its LECP deactivated earlier in March of 2025, and Voyager 1 lost its cosmic ray subsystem in February 2025.
It really highlights the foresight of the engineering teams to have this exact sequence of prioritization mapped out years in advance. But I want to talk about the specific instrument that drew the short straw this time, because we're saying farewell to the LECP, and it has this incredible legacy.
It really does. The low-energy charged particles experiment has been running almost continuously since 1977.
What was it actually doing out there?
It measures ions, electrons, and cosmic rays. For decades, it was instrumental in mapping the outer layers of the heliosphere, which is the big protective bubble our sun creates.
Right.
It tracked how the solar wind from our sun interacts with the plasma from interstellar space. And it actually proved that the intensity of cosmic rays is lower inside our solar system's bubble than outside of it.
So it was basically the ship's lookout, just standing on the bow of Voyager, feeling the physical spray of the cosmic ocean and telling us exactly where the safety of our solar system ends and the wild interstellar sea begins.
That's a great analogy. It physically felt the transition when Voyager 1 crossed into interstellar space in 2012.
But since Voyager 1 is literally the only thing out there right now, how devastating is this loss? I mean, are we just flying blind now when it comes to understanding the interstellar medium?
Well, it is a significant loss, absolutely. The data the LECP provided was wholly unique. Literally no other human-made object has explored this region. But it's important to contextualize it. The science team got decades of foundational data about that boundary, where the sun's influence wanes and galactic forces take over.
They mapped the border.
Yes. And here's a truly fascinating, kind of hopeful detail from the shutdown procedure. When they sent the command to kill the power to the LECP, they deliberately left one small part of it active.
Wait, really? What part?
A tiny, low-power stepper motor that physically spins the sensor.
Why on earth would you leave a motor running if you're so desperate for every fraction of a watt?
Because of the cold vacuum of space. If you stop a metal gear from moving out there for too long, the metal parts can literally fuse together in a process called cold welding.
Oh, wow. So if they turn it off, it's permanently welded shut.
Exactly. So they intentionally left the motor ticking over, just in case, by some miracle power margins improve in the future, and they want to reactivate it.
That is just incredible. They're shutting down the lab, but leaving the key in the lock, just stubbornly refusing to close the door completely.
It's that JPL engineering mindset. Never say never.
Okay, so the LECP is offline, but Voyager 1 isn't dead. What exactly is left? What are the final senses the spacecraft still possesses to navigate?
There are only two primary science instruments left running. The magnetometer, which measures magnetic fields, and the plasma wave subsystem, which detects plasma waves and oscillations in the environment.
So it's essentially been stripped down to a compass and a microphone.
Basically, yes.
It can't see the particles anymore like the LECP did, but it can feel the magnetic pull with the compass, and it can hear the vibrations of the plasma with the microphone. What kind of picture does that actually paint of interstellar space? Like, what are we learning from that?
Quite a lot, actually. The magnetometer is incredibly valuable. It provides continuous readings of the interstellar magnetic field. It shows scientists how the sun's magnetic field, that big bubble, actually drapes and interacts at the boundary with the galaxy's magnetic field.
Right, like currents in an ocean meeting each other.
Exactly. And the plasma wave instrument, the microphone, is listening to shocks in the sparse plasma environment. When the sun spits out a massive solar flare, that shock wave eventually hits interstellar space, and the plasma wave subsystem can literally hear the plasma ringing like a bell.
That is so cool.
It is. And NASA hopes they can run these two remaining instruments for about another year under the current power constraints.
Just a year, because of that 4-watt drain.
Right. But, and this is where the story gets really wild, the JPL engineers are not just passively watching the clock tick down on that year.
No, of course not. They have a plan.
They have a very radical intervention planned. It's called the Big Bang Power Saving Initiative.
The Big Bang gamut. I was visibly shocked when I read the details of this in the sources. It sounds completely insane. Walk us through what this actually is.
So the problem with turning off components to save power is that those components generate waste heat. And that waste heat actually helps keep the spacecraft warm. Specifically, it helps keep those crucial hydrazine fuel lines from freezing.
Ah, so if you just turn off a radio or a sensor, that part of the ship gets too cold.
Exactly. So the Big Bang Initiative involves hot swapping multiple power devices all at once. They want to simultaneously switch to lower power alternatives to drop the overall power draw, but do it so quickly and carefully that the thermal stability of the spacecraft isn't compromised.
That is, I mean, I described it in my notes as doing a heart transplant while the patient is sprinting away from you.
It's an apt description.
But if power margins are already razor thin and every single watt is quite literally life or death, isn't swapping multiple devices at once an incredibly terrifying gamble? Like, if the voltage drops for a second, won't it trigger that fault protection system we talked about?
It absolutely could. It is a massive gamble. But it's a necessary one to combat the physics of the decaying plutonium. And they aren't going in blind. They have a brilliant risk mitigation strategy.
They're going to test it on Voyager 2 first, right?
Yes. Voyager 2 is in a slightly healthier power state. So the plan is to test the Big Bang maneuver on Voyager 2 in May or June of 2026.
Using it as the canary in the coal mine.
Exactly. And if it's successful, if the thermal mass holds and the voltage stabilizes, then they will attempt it on Voyager 1 no earlier than July.
Wow. And if it works, what's the payoff for taking that risk?
Success could extend the science operations of the final instruments toward 2030.
So they buy themselves 4 extra years.
4 extra years of absolutely irreplaceable data from the deepest reaches of space human technology has ever reached.
Which really makes you step back and appreciate the grand legacy of this whole mission. I mean, to understand why engineers in 2026 are fighting so fiercely for a single extra watt, you have to look at the staggering resume of Voyager over the last 49 years.
It is unmatched in the history of space exploration.
Seriously, like it launched during this rare planetary alignment, right? A gravity assist trajectory that only happens once every 175 years.
Right, the Grand Tour. It allowed the Voyagers to use the gravity of Jupiter to slingshot to Saturn, and so on.
And the encounters, Jupiter in 1979, getting those close-ups of the Great Red Spot.
And discovering active volcanoes on Jupiter's moon, Io, that was a paradigm shift. We thought moons were dead rocks, and suddenly we see volcanoes erupting in deep space.
Then Saturn in 1980, the intricate structure of the rings diving into the thick atmosphere of Titan.
And then, the pivot. The planetary mission ended, and the Voyager interstellar mission began. Voyager 1 crossed the heliopause in 2012, and Voyager 2 followed in 2018.
They discovered the magnetic highway out there. It's just a historical juxtaposition that blows my mind. These machines were built in an era of 8-track tapes and rotary phones, yet they became our first interstellar scouts.
It's phenomenal engineering.
But I'm curious, how is data from a 1970s probe still directly influencing modern space programs today? Like, why does NASA need this data for things happening now?
Because it connects directly to humanity's future in space. Think about the Artemis program, right? We are trying to send humans back to the moon and eventually to Mars.
Right, long-duration crewed missions.
The biggest threat out there isn't propulsion, it's radiation. The decades of data Voyager collected regarding cosmic radiation and galactic environments directly inform the shielding models we use today. You can't design a safe Mars spacecraft without knowing exactly what kind of radiation environment it's flying into. And Voyager is the only probe that's actually out there measuring it.
So the data from the LECP is actively protecting future astronauts.
Absolutely. And it also informs the design of future interstellar probes. Voyager proved that with careful husbandry, machines can endure decades beyond their design expectations.
Yeah, the sheer stubbornness of the human element. The engineers from the 70s passing the baton to the operators in 2026.
It spans generations.
Well, this has been an incredible journey today. Just to quickly recap for everyone, we've walked through the agonizing 23-hour delay of sending the command to shut down the LECP. We looked at the physical reality of those decaying RTG power sources, losing 4 watts a year, and why the freezing point of hydrazine dictates every single decision.
And we covered the audacity of that upcoming Big Bang test to try to keep those final 2 instruments running.
Exactly. So to everyone listening, I hope it's clear now that shutting off the LECP is not the end. It's this brilliant strategic pause in an epic saga.
Every single additional day we receive data from that magnetometer and plasma wave subsystem is a profound victory for human ingenuity and curiosity.
It really is. But I want to leave you with one final kind of provocative thought before we sign off today. Voyager 1 is currently traveling at roughly 38,000 miles per hour, heading generally toward the constellation of Fucus. Now, eventually, the projections say around 2032 or 2035, the power will finally drop so low that total communication loss will happen.
The RTGs will simply not have the power to run the transmitter.
Right. It will go silent, but the spacecraft itself won't stop. It will continue to drift, completely frozen for millions, maybe billions of years. And bolted to its side is the golden record, that time capsule of Earth's sounds, music, and images. So long after our deep space antennas lose Voyager 1 signal, it will still be out there in the dark. It's going to take tens of thousands of years just to approach another star system. So think about this. If someone or something eventually intercepts that silent probe drifting through the galaxy and they somehow decode that golden record, will they ever be able to comprehend the sheer, stubborn human willpower it took just to keep its eyes open for one more year?